Well, mountaineers and their guides are leaving at Mount Everest base camp amid increasing uncertainty over this year's climbing season. Conditions remain treacherous after an avalanche killed 16 Sherpas. Patrick Hollingworth is an experienced mountaineer who knows the dangers of climbing Mount Everest. He's led many expeditions up the mountain, and one of his friends was killed in the avalanche. Patrick joins us from Perth. Patrick, good to speak to you this morning. Let's first talk about what's happened in the past week. As I've just mentioned, you lost your friend, Ankaji Sherpa. Just describe to us the events of the past week.
Yeah, it's been quite a difficult week. Ankaji and 15 other Sherpa climbers were killed on Friday morning, Nepal time, in a ice serac collapse on the lower part of the route on Everest. They were carrying loads up to Camp 1 to set the route higher up the mountain. And unfortunately, they were all beneath the serac when it collapsed. Yeah, so it's been a really hard week. And there's a lot of people in Nepal and further around the world who are really hurting a lot at the moment as a result of these Sherpa deaths. And Ankaji himself was a really beautiful person, a very competent, hard-to mountaineer, summited Everest 5 times. For many of us, there's a huge void now that he's gone, and it's very sad.
And Patrick, I understand that you were actually meant to be on the mountain at that time.
Not on Everest. I was actually due to be climbing Makalu, which is the 5th highest peak in the world. It's about 20 or 30 k's to the east of Everest, and I was going to be climbing it just with Ankaji. However, due to family and business reasons, I wasn't able to, so I had to cancel that expedition in mid-January, and so Ankaji went on to Everest. So my immediate reaction after realising that Ankaji was dead was thinking, wow, if we should have been on Makalu and Ang would still be alive today if that was the case. So that's had quite an impact on me, I feel, in some way, responsible, I guess.
Just describe to us how dangerous this is, not only for mountaineers as yourself, but for the Sherpas, as we've just been talking about, 16 having just lost their lives. They put their lives on the line every time, essentially. They guide people up the mountain.
They do, and look, it's quite a complex sort of scenario. Some Sherpas are working as professional guides, like Ankaji was. Other Sherpas are not working as guides; they're essentially working as porters. And they're carrying loads of equipment up the mountain. They're establishing the route on the mountain and stocking camps. So you then have Western commercial clients who are joining commercial expeditions, and they're then using the route and using the camps that the Sherpas have established. So, arguably, look, there's no denying the fact that these Sherpas are putting themselves in harm's way a lot more so than the Western commercial climbers.
A lot of money has been made in ferrying Western tourists to the summit of Mount Everest, but as I understand it, the Sherpas, while they're well paid by Nepal standards, overall they're not getting a fair slice of this commercialism.
Look, the Sherpas do pretty well out of it in terms of incomes relative to the average annual income in Nepal. I think they're probably earning up to 10 times that amount. So they're doing very well, but comparative to Western guides, not so much. But one thing I have to pull you up on, the use of, I think, Everest and tourism is a paradox. Tourism to trekkers walking to Everest Base Camp, that's fine, and that's tourism. Mountaineering on Everest is not tourism. Mountaineering, especially on the large 8,000 metre peaks of the world, particularly on Everest, is a serious game where people die regularly, and it's not a place for novice climbers to be, despite them being able to afford that. A huge industry has sprung up around helping relatively novice climbers get access to a mountain that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. And so it's been quite a successful commercial model for a lot of people, but I think you've got to question the extent to which this level of, inexperience is occurring on the mountain. These days, consistently you're seeing climbers with very little experience, and why they're going to Everest is beyond me, because I don't know what happened to serving a 10-year apprenticeship and getting your experience and gradually climbing larger mountains. Everybody just wants to climb Everest straight away now, which is crazy.
Well, indeed. That's why I mentioned the so-called tourist on Everest. Essentially, you've just alluded to that, the fact that many are completely inexperienced and they are tourists on the mountain. How then Do you overcome that and not put those lives at risk?
Look, I think what needs to be set in place is some guidelines or some framework around levels of experience. Now, I may be accused of being elitist here by suggesting that you've got to have prior experience and you've got to have climbed 6,000 metre peaks and then 7,000 metre peaks and then another 8,000 metre peak prior to going to Everest. But I just think that's common sense. One of the issues is, I mean, it's a huge income generator. This year alone, I think the Nepali government gets about $3 million in permit fees. So, you know, Nepal is a very poor country, and you can understand it's not necessarily in their interest to curtail commercial activities on the mountain. But I think that it's partly up to the commercial outfitters themselves to be to have a framework in place and to not actually accept climbers who don't have, you know, enough experience.
Patrick Hollingworth, thanks so much for joining us.
Cheers.